By the mid-1930s in Canada, the mass marketing of hockey was in full swing. Cards from chewing gum companies, promotional items from the makers of hockey equipment, corn syrup, cereal, beer, and cigarettes, while car manufacturers and oil producers sponsored nationwide radio broadcasts. Across the country, the popularity of the Toronto Maple Leafs drove most of this lean, mean money-making machinery, and having the league's top NHL sniper, Charlie Conacher, certainly helped the team's brand in the United States as well. Here's Conacher on the right with King Clancy on the left in the summer of 1934. They're out enjoying some golf with fellow sports celebrity Jimmy McLarnin, who was the world welterweight boxing champ at the time. There was a lot of anticipation for that 34-35 season, which saw 4 rookies join the team. There was Toronto-born Bob Davidson, along with Pep Kelly, Art Jackson, also from Toronto, and Nick Metz. Much of the hype focused on Kelly, Jackson, and Metz, who the press dubbed the Kiddie Line, in obvious reference to the great Kid Line. Ha! No pressure. Even Canada's French language hockey media got into the Kiddie Line hype. Ha! Pas de pression. So, Conn Smythe's Leafs were the highest profile team in an era of mass licensing and marketing, as they'd say today. Considering that Toronto had only 1 championship during its first 7 seasons, whereas the Rangers and the Canadiens each had 2 over the same period, what exactly explained the club's oversized appeal? A lot of it comes down to this man, Foster Hewitt. His dad was a sports journalist, so it wasn't unusual that the young Foster ended up down the same road, eventually doing NHL radio play-by-play at Detroit's Olympia Stadium and Toronto's old Mutual Street Arena. The first broadcast there in 1923 was basically done from inside a phone booth to block out the crowd noises. When Smythe built Maple Leaf Gardens in 1931, he installed a specific area for radio broadcasting, 65 feet, almost 20 meters above the ice, and from there launched a national radio network for Leaf games. From this dedicated vantage point, nicknamed the Gondola, Hewitt's exceptional descriptive skills captivated audiences for decades. He retired from calling Leaf games in 1968. There were other great sports broadcasters at that time, like Wes McKnight, but Foster Hewitt's formidable skill at capturing Canada's hockey-mad imagination with what were called radio word pictures cannot be overstated. He was a superstar. When Hewitt joined the Leafs off-season on their barnstorming publicity tours of Western Canada, he was always the biggest draw with autograph seekers. Foster Hewitt was largely responsible for expanding and cementing hockey's early broadcast audiences and famously welcomed his listeners with "Hello, Canada," and hockey fans in the United States and Newfoundland. However, his greatest legacy is his greatest quote. He shoots, he scores. Holy Mackinaw, what a catchphrase. Here's a November 1934 ad for Hewitt's radio broadcasts, brought to you by General Motors. The Leafs came out of the gate 8-0 and were on their way to yet another regular season club record result. They were led, as usual, by the scoring prowess of the Kid Line, with support from Flash Hollett, Baldy Cotton, Heck Kelray, Bill Toms, and the seemingly ageless King Clancy on defense. In net, Toronto continued to be firmly anchored by another one of their veteran stalwarts, George Hainsworth, the team's hometown workhorse. Here's another of my favorite photos. It shows Hainsworth and his fellow Leafs that season, after a game, enjoying a carbonated beverage. This image was used in an ad selling Conn Smythe's favorite drink, a dry ginger ale from Canada whose name eludes me at the moment. Yet another great regular season was followed by yet another loss in the finals, their second such result in 3 years. But even a famine of Stanley Cups could not diminish the public's appetite for the kind of celebrity journalism we take for granted today. It was still new in hockey at that time, but it fed the same fascination that we have with glimpses into the lives of the rich and famous. Such as King, Andy, Charlie, Hap, and Red playing cards mid-season. Or Con and his wife, Irene, heading off on an ocean voyage to England after that playoff loss to the Maroons. The Leafs entered the 1935-36 NHL campaign as the league's highest scoring club, and they would be so again, led by the game's biggest name, Charlie Conacher. He was such a marketable commodity that companies used him even when Pep Kelly was the obvious choice. Charlie Conacher led the Leafs in scoring during that 35-36 season. However, the kid line no longer owned the team's leaderboard. Toms, Bowl, Metz, Jackson, and Kelly were all breaking up the trio's dominance. But little else changed from that year's club to this year's, as only 2 new skaters made appearances, and you hardly notice. Local talent Reg Hamilton played 7 regular season games, while Normie Mann got in 1 during the playoffs. There were high hopes for another Stanley Cup that year, particularly after the Leafs defeated the Bruins and the Americans on their way to the finals for the 2nd straight year, where they lost to the Red Wings. Here's an article about Hap Day before the 1935-36 season even began. Could he have known then that he was the captain of a club about to undergo a fundamental makeover? In 3 years' time, only 8 players on that team would remain, and he wouldn't be one of them. However, personnel changes could not deaden the media-driven marketing power of the Leafs, who continued promoting everything under the sun. Hap Day, shaving cream. Joe Primo, tobacco. King Clancy, fruit salts. And half the bench marketing car tires. You name it, they sold it. Yes, the Leafs could sell anything at that time, but they couldn't avoid time itself. Age was beginning to be a factor for the core group that was responsible for the club's exalted status, and it was clear to Smythe that changes were needed. That overhaul would bring about the building blocks of the NHL's first dynasty team years later. In part because Con was way ahead of his time when it came to developing apps.